I exchanged messages a couple of hours ago with George Galloway, and he was asking me if I'd heard anything or if there are any signs of trouble in sunny Rochdale. And I was pleased to inform him that I hadn't heard a dicky bird. No signs of any unrest, no trouble. And then I put the word out, and I'm like, has anyone heard that there's anything organised or anyone starting any trouble around the town? And he came back, no, nothing, haven't heard anything. And I'm like, well, thank God for that. So I answered back to George. I said, look, I've not heard anything. I know a few people in the know. I know a few people who hear the rumours, live different parts, got their eyes open, and know there's no signs of trouble. And I said to him, this might seem a bit counterintuitive, but if I was looking for anywhere where there were likely to be trouble, I'd say that there'd be trouble in the northeast and Hull. So it might seem counterintuitive, but I had a long time of working on the road in this country, so I've been exchanging messages with chaps I used to drive with who know the country as well as I do, up and down, and ask them where they think there's likely to be trouble. Now there's like a disenfranchisement. See, this is the thing. I talked about, no one listens to me. I mean, I talked about it in videos I made around the general election, is to say that the real thing you need to understand from this general election we've just had is that something like 45% of this country are disenfranchised, didn't vote for anyone, and they still live here. And that's your danger, that's the problem, that's where things look really bad. And I mean, we can watch a video I made about, like, this is how, I don't know, I can't remember what it's called, it's like, what I think, ask me what I think, it's called something like that, what I think is going to happen. So, I got to banding it around, and I don't know I hope you don't find this in bad taste, but I came up with a list of places that 10 years ago, when I used to be on the road, that I knew were just at breaking point for all kinds of different subtle reasons, some similar, some different. Places at breaking point for reasons of poverty, high house prices, high rents and poverty, homelessness problems, general problems with lawlessness that had to be seen to be believed. And I came up with a list. It's not very long, but it's not what you might think. There's not places that you'd immediately think of as being hot spots for trouble. So tonight you've got it in Sunderland. There's a couple of police stations on fire. Sunderland, I put to George, look for trouble in the northeast. I was thinking more like Middlesbrough, which is like an absurd place. Middlesbrough is an absurd place. Hartlepool is an absurd place. So the town centre's nice and tidy, being the case in Middlesbrough, but it's like it's a facade that hides an incredible amount of poverty. And you can see in the northeast, you can see the dead industry, you can see the reasons why those places exist shut down. Go to Teesside, Middlesbrough, you see that huge ICI factory. And you're like, wonder how many people work there now? Wonder how many people worked there 50 years ago? And it's like these places' reasons for existing have just gone. And these people are dirt poor. You can usually tell when you're in a place that's dirt poor. And in the past, I've been criticised for saying this. Criticised quite a bit. Where people would go, well, how do you know somewhere's poor? I said, well, I used to get on a lot of trains first thing in the morning when most people were commuting to work. I was on my way to my second job of the day at like 8 o'clock in the morning, where I'd set off at 3 o'clock in the morning, drop a car off at 7 and be on a train at 7:30. to my next job. So I'm on my way to my next job and everyone else on the train's on the way to work. And you just look at the people who are travelling to work and look at what they're wearing. And it gives you a rough idea of just how poor the people are. And you'd be on a train from like Milton Keynes heading into London and you'd see that most of them are pretty well heeled. They got nice shoes on. They're wearing smart suits. They've made a definite effort about their appearance. It's okay. They've spent money on their work attire. And then you get on a train on like the Great Western, South Wales, and you look at some young woman who's on her way to her office job in Cardiff, and she looks like she's been dressed up straight out of Asda. She's literally wearing 20 quid. But she's dressed up smart for work, as best she can do. And you look at her shoes on her feet, and they're a tenner's worth. That's how you know. That's where you know. It gives you, because it's like the same kind of socio-economic class ride the trains. You know, the same sort of status. It's a great measure. And from that, I've, in the past, ascertained, I got the idea as to where the poorest parts of this country are, or the parts that are in the most trouble, where their reasons to exist have long since disappeared. And because they're relatively cheap places to live, over the last 10-15 years, they've been rammed with immigrants. No one in the world asks to live in Scunthorpe. You arrive in this country, you don't ask to live in Scunthorpe. When you were coming here, you'd have probably hoped that you could have maybe settled down in London. But no, you can't live in London. There's not enough money for you, so you get sent somewhere. I live in Rochdale. People get bussed into Rochdale to live here. They arrive in this country and they get bussed into Rochdale to live here. Nobody set off wanting to live in Rochdale. So immigrants get dumped in these places that are relatively cheap to live compared to London or the south. They get dumped. Rochdale is one of those dumping grounds. So's Oldham. Bury isn't, though, strangely. Not so much anyway. So the next town along, no, it's the land of milk and honey. But there's these places you look at. It was poor already, and because it was poor, it was a relatively cheap place to live, and then it gets rammed with immigrants. And then suddenly it's not such a cheap place to live because they've taken up all the scarcity, all the availability in the housing markets and created scarcity. So the rents have gone up, so they've become poorer. They've become more expensive places to live, and the job situation there hasn't changed. So there's a kind of government funding intervention happened that's filled the coffers of the council and the private landlords. This is the pattern I see. So from that, this is where I come up with a list of places where I'm thinking it's more likely than not to kick off. And there'll be trouble. And there'll be reasons why that have got nothing to do with what happened in Southport. That'd just be an excuse. Names of places. And I'm not trying to cause trouble here. I'm telling you, it's like, if there's going to be trouble, these are the kind of places where it's going to kick off. And you wouldn't think that this is what's would happen, but I'm telling you, there's going to be trouble. So, Accrington, like the poorest town one of the poorest towns in the north of England, Accrington. It's a dump. Sorry, people from Accra, it's a dump. You live in a dump. And if you could escape from the place, you would have escaped from the place already. It's a dump. Accrington is a dump. Blackburn and Burnley aren't so far away, but it's like their immigrant populations are established. They're second and third generation immigrants. in Blackburn and Burnley. So don't look to them for trouble and upheaval. The place has already been stabilised in some regards. I don't look to Blackburn and Burnley with big Muslim populations as being trouble. I don't look to Rochdale so much for it to be trouble, but there are places that I can think of where there will be. Accrington, Stoke-on-Trent, the potteries. Ain't so many pots being made round there nowadays, though, is there? Wolverhampton. What? Wolverhampton. One you wouldn't believe because nobody ever hears of it. A place that's never ever mentioned in any dispatch in any way at all. Peterborough. Have you ever been to Peterborough? You ever spoke to people from Peterborough? They are unable to afford to live in Peterborough. It's got a big problem with unemployment, but it's got a big problem with house prices. The biggest travellers' camps you've ever seen in your life are in and around Peterborough, with people living in sheds. Massive housing problem. Peterborough. Lots of immigration has made matters worse. I go up to Peterborough for trouble. And another one that's high on my list as to where when it kicked off in Sunderland, as I was telling George, I go up to Hull for there to be trouble. Hull. Hull's a port city that used to provide a great deal of work. Big fishing enterprise as well. Much like its neighbour, Grimsby. Those places are dead and have long since been abandoned. They've been abandoned, but the people who live there still live there. Hull and Grimsby are devastated shitholes for just random criminality of being someone who used to visit Hull quite often. You see, for me, it's actually a good job. It used to be a good job to go to Hull because it's just straight down the end of the M62. So I used to go to Hull and Grimsby quite often. Grimsby, all about fishing. The Mariners, aren't they the football team? There's not so much of that goes on there anymore. It's a dead place. But what has it got? Well, it's been rammed with immigration in the last 10 years. Hull, the same. No more industries arrived, but the cost of living, the price to buy a house or live to rent somewhere has gone up because the scarcity's arrived in the marketplace. The government have been sending immigrants to places that it's cheaper to house them as a tactic to save money over the last decade, maybe longer. So what have they done? They've sent them to the poorest parts of the country, the poorest places. Other place on the list, Newcastle. You have any ships being built around Newcastle way nowadays? Coal mines? No. Look to Newcastle for trouble. Poverty. And become expensive places to live. Nottingham. What? Yeah, kind of a spread out place. But, you know, once an industrial powerhouse, not so much now. Nottingham has become a poor place. Look to Nottingham for trouble. They had their own recent, like last couple of years, incident with rampaging maniac, mental patient, getting to murdering random people in the street. It's not so long since that happened in Nottingham. Look to Nottingham for trouble. Scunthorpe. A dump. Poor. The centrepiece of the town being like the biggest slag heap. It may have been moved now, I haven't been there for 10 years. The biggest slag heap you've ever seen in your life. And it not being added to because the industry's gone from Scunthorpe. They're just left with a great big slag heap. You get to Scunthorpe and you're like, maybe something like Runcorn. You ever been to Runcorn? If you'd ever been to Runcorn, you'd know the smell of Runcorn. It's a poor place. It's a fucking shithole. Runcorn. There's a power station there. And it stinks. The place stinks. You get there, you open the car window and you can smell the place. And the people who live there don't smell it anymore. But people who come from outside Runcorn get there and they can smell the place. What's it called? What's the I should remember what it's called. It's called Rock something or other. Runcorn. I'm googling. Power plant. Name. Rock Savage it's called. Rock Savage Power Station. Rock Savage Power Station is an operating power station of at least 810 megawatts in Runcorn, Cheshire, United Kingdom. It stinks. Gas-fired power station. That's a shithole. Then it just gets me thinking about, Ellesmere Port. I don't think so many people work there nowadays. Now there's no car factories there anymore. Ellesmere Port strikes me as being somewhere that's on its uppers. So why don't we move around the peninsula? Rock Ferry. Ever heard of Rock Ferry? There's a singer called Duffy who disappeared from the world having had a bad experience and going quite mad. She brought out an album called Rock Ferry, and there's a song called Rock Ferry, and I visited Rock Ferry on a couple of occasions. I'm like, yeah, this strikes me as a place where dreams come to die. This is a shithole. No work. Nowhere to work. No heavy industry. Run down. Abandoned practically. A shithole. Bechenet. Why are people assaulting police stations? Because the police have abandoned them. People tend to do what they want in places like Sunderland, and to get the police to turn up, pretty similar as if you live in Rochdale. They don't come. It's too much work. Everything's a can of worms. They're more concerned about what people think than actually doing the job of policing. Somewhere else with potential for there to be trouble. There's loads of other places that I could mention as to where there's poor, but strangely the geography of the place, how the place is all spread out, would suggest that civil unrest be unlikely, because it's not the easiest thing for people to kind of unify. So Preston, I don't think there'll be any trouble in Preston. I don't think there'll be any trouble in Oldham, because Oldham's like, there's no such place as Oldham. It's really just like 7 villages. That's why Oldham town centre's died. There's nothing that actually feeds it. Complicated, but in some regards, certain places would be spared from social unrest, even though there's indicators like poverty and nowhere to live. Nowhere to live, nowhere to work, and no hope. Where the geography rules out trouble. Notice how all these places are in the north. All of them that I'm talking about. If you lived in the north, you might think places like Peterborough, where it's a dead place. You might think that's in the south, but if you look at the map, no, it's in the north. It's north of the Watford Gap. It's north of Watford Gap services. It's in the north, as is Nottingham. Nottingham's a northern city. It's in the Midlands, but it's a northern city, as is Wolverhampton. Might kick off in Walsall, possibly. I've been to all these places. I've used the bus services. I've got on the trains. You can tell if a place is on the up or on the down based on its infrastructure, its ability, how it finds work, how it gets people to and from work. You can tell something about a place. The high street in the town I live in is absolutely dead, but it wasn't dead 10 years ago. But there are places in Britain where the high street is long since dead. I've been to Eccles. I've been to Blackburn. Doesn't have a retail centre much of any kind anymore. Doesn't have a town centre that you could recognise. There's a Morrison's, but in what used to be a high street, and then every building in the high street abandoned. That's what it was like 10 years ago. Like these twats who apparently inform us never leave London. There's certain parts of London that are absolutely just awful, but nobody lives in Croydon, do they? No one who matters lives in Croydon. It's just one little blip, one little blot on the landscape. Nobody really lives in Croydon, do they, who matters? But it's a dump. You notice for London, there's places that aren't on the London Underground. It's as if they don't exist. Well, you're on the overground train and the bus to get there is usually in decline. Or in some cases, downright lawless. The police don't get involved because if the police were to get involved, they'd have an endless supply of work, and they're not a profit-making organisation. Everything that they do is a loss, so they don't engage. You notice how Liverpool, there was a demonstration planned for tonight, and it's gone off without any trouble because people came out to oppose setting the city on fire. That's because Liverpool is a relatively prosperous place. In the past, it's been poor. It's not poor anymore. Liverpool isn't the dump it was once considered to be 20 years ago. It's not that anymore. It's been gentrified. Liverpool is a nicer place to live than any of the other places I've mentioned. Liverpool has cleaned up its act. I still wouldn't, leave a bag unattended in Liverpool because it's still full of scousers. But it's not a dump anymore. But it got a lot of attention. There's something went on called the Toxteth riots, a very ugly affair in the 1980s. I remember it from being a kid. And then being an adult, having been someone who travelled there quite a bit, it was under the spotlight and needed tidying up. So over the last 20 years, Liverpool's been tidying up. Liverpool's actually quite a nice place to visit now. Liverpool's more prosperous than Manchester, I think. Well, there's plenty of places that have just... Don't get me started on Birmingham. But again, Birmingham's council's gone bankrupt. Frontline services have been cut. Jobs have been lost. And in this country, if the government starts laying people off, that's a big problem because the government are probably the biggest employer in the country. Get a town like Rochdale that hasn't got a manned police station, hasn't got an A&E, hasn't got a maternity ward, has got an infirmary building that still operates as a kind of just an outpatients clinic. If you break your leg or something, you go to Rochdale Infirmary, they have a quick look at you, and then they put you in an ambulance and send you to Bury, or they send you to Oldham, or they send you to Manchester, all on the dime of the taxpayer. And waiting for 4 or 5 hours in the back of an ambulance, they count that as a hospital bed. They count being left in a corridor for 12 hours waiting to be admitted, having been admitted to hospital, waiting to be put on a ward. They call that a hospital bed as well. So like, this country is on its uppers, and it didn't start with the Conservatives being elected. It's been very, very poorly managed, and most of it ignored for most of my adult life. Most of it's been ignored. Certain parts of it have been tidied up. We've got some very fancy facades, but there's an undercurrent of deep misery, mental illness and poverty that never gets addressed. Towns and cities I've named in this little video I've made, I haven't really mentioned South Wales. Go and check out the valleys if you ever get the chance to. You had, back when I used to get around, towns in South Wales so poor, they don't even have a Greg's Bakery. They don't even have an Aldi. They don't have a Tesco. You'll not find a Tesco in Pontypridd or Pontypool. You just not find them. The absence of chain stores like we'd see them elsewhere, because everywhere you go, practically every town in Britain has got an out-of-town retail park that's got all the brands. Pizza Hut. You know, they're just everywhere. Used to be the case. Everywhere you went was the same. It had an out-of-town retail park with all the names. Dixon's, PC World. Practically every single place you went had one of these out-of-town retail parks. Now in South Wales. South Wales, the one that I used to spot the most by way of franchises was Mr. Clutch. Everywhere, Mr. Clutch, everywhere, and it's because of all the hills. It's a joke to people. If you want to make money, open a sort of quick fit style tyre and clutch and brake specialist drive-in centre in Wales, in South Wales, and you'll make out like a bandit because of all the hills. There's hills in South Wales so steep, if you were pushing a pram and something happened and you let go of the pram, you might never see your child again. It's like just a mile straight downhill. Wondrous place on a skateboard. You probably get up to about 30 mile an hour on a skateboard in some places in South Wales. But it's like the place is just forgotten. There's no money being spent on that. Am I right? Am I wrong? But if people have become so disenfranchised as to where 45% of them haven't voted, it's because they've given up hope that things can get better. And every time promises have been made to them to make the place better, they've made the place worse. Like I say, spent 10 minutes thinking about it and produced a little list for you. It's not good news.